I am truly honored to be with you today. I think myself and the whole AmericaSpeaks team, and frankly the country, is deeply grateful for all that you've accomplished through the National Breast Cancer Coalition. You know, you don't need me to remind you, but as I began to work with Annette to understand why you were attracted to have someone of my background and expertise be part of your annual get-together, I learned a lot, more specifically, about what you've actually done. And it is amazing, both the way in which you've gotten services to low-income women, your very savvy political understanding of how research dollars could be captured through the Defense Department's unique programs more quickly than most organizations figured that out. But you know all of that history. The big deal to me, and why I'm here on Sunday morning, is as you 3.5 years ago stepped out to do a different approach, recognizing that not enough progress has been made on prevention, and I just sat through the last panel in terms of just tremendous efforts that are being done in the metastasis process. As part of that, you made a choice that many advocacy groups often do not make. And I'm first going to say there's a specific reason that we're with you today. AmericaSpeaks is committed to the same evidence-based approach to what works in terms of community engagement that you are committed to in terms of works with breast cancer research. As you said in my introduction, we've done hundreds of thousands of people, many, many projects. So it is the innovation, the specific ways we design what we do, that we hope will be part of an inspiration to you as you move out to different forms of community engagement to mobilize people, that the next time you meet, or 3 years from when you meet, it's no longer tens of thousands of people, but it's actually hundreds of thousands of people. So that's our goal. That's what we want to do with you. The particular way that I'm going to go about working with you, this actually is a picture of the Jacob Javits Center after the 9/11 tragedy. This is July 20th, 2002. In that convention center, there were 5,000 demographically representative New Yorkers who came together to review the plans for rebuilding listening to the city, rebuilding the World Trade Center. Some of you may actually remember this. Because of this public engagement process, the original designs that the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation put out were completely scrapped because they did not meet the collective wisdom of the general public and stakeholders' view in their hearts and minds of what should happen on that site. And if any of you have been there, and you should go, what you see about the use of the site in terms of the memorial and the museum tracks back to decisions that were made in that room. Now, when you put us on the program, you gave me the title of Grassroots Organizing. And if I backed up, you'll notice I changed that to community engagement. There are many, many different ways to go about grassroots mobilization. Great video from Wisconsin that describes several of them. I'm going to be talking to you today about a very specific orientation toward that everybody in the community could be mobilized if we reached them. We have terrible habits of calling people to public meetings in this country. We assume if we announce it, we assume if we put it in the paper and the radio, they will just show up. Well, who shows up are people like us, people who are already activated, people who already know how important this is. And yet, as I understand where your judgment is about your own movement, if we don't go outside of that, if we don't get a lot of unusual suspects, if I can say it that way, into the room to follow your approach, to get more endorsements to your approach, we will miss the kind of push that can come from public demand. So that's the whole approach that we're going to take with you. I can skip that. Well, I want to say one last thing. Linking political will, public will, to political will for significant change. That's the kind of community organization that really we are going to try to go into quite a bit of detail with you today. You know, all of our work was about changing public policy, and you know, for a moment I'll put my hat on in the arena that we work on this. I'm sure each of you would have your own way of saying what your concerns about our democracy are today, that the space for people has been pushed further and further out because of ideology, because of how the media's changed, because of the enormous amounts of money. But on the big issues, we are still never going to get over the hump. Immigration, education reform, unless there is a demonstrated public will that can give some more backbone to our politicians. So the ability to create these kinds of spaces, you're going to do it about breast cancer. But you're going to learn some things today, we hope, that means people in your community would learn some things that they could repeat that on other issues, thereby building up communities' capacity to have stronger citizen voice in democracy. I'm going to take you through a case study. And Annette and Joanne, when we met, I talked about this. Most of our work was pretty big scale, because that's what we were designed to do. And sometimes when I give talks like this, it gets intimidating to people in the sense of, wait a minute, we're never going to do 5,000 people in a room. But we decided that working through a specific case, start to finish, would give you insight into how it's done that's equally applicable to 100 people, or 200 people, or 300 people. This is also very technology-based, which is how we get to the thousands. In the workshops this afternoon, some of you in some communities probably already have organizations that have at least one of the technologies that we use that you could bring into these meetings. So join me for about the next 15, 20 minutes. Know that the whole reason for showing it to you this way is to inspire you about what can be done. And at any moment that it feels like it's too complex, just let it wash over you. Just take in what you can take in. All right. So this was done in June of 2010. Cycle back to that era, that time period, you know, the biggest fight in the country was about debt and deficit. The president had created the Fiscal Commission that Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson chaired. We worked directly with them to develop this strategy and do this across the United States. 3,500 Americans, matching our demographics. Here again, that's a quality we have to do. You don't have to meet that perfect standard, but I'll bet you every one of you in your own community could right now write down 2 or 3 groups in your community that have never walked into a breast cancer coalition meeting ever and won't walk in unless they understand how it's related to their lives and unless they think it will make a difference. So 3,500 people, conservative to liberal, race, gender, income, the whole 9 yards. The big flags on the map show the 19 cities that we primarily located this in. We were in Philadelphia running it. You'll see me in a video in a few minutes. The stars are other communities that picked up and did this on their own just because it was a webcast streamed process. That's another thing, if you haven't brought that into your community meetings, even if you only do 100 people, add that element to it, and a lot of people will see it on their computers. Okay, I'm going to switch to the video that will give you the overview and the elements.
We all know we face a major challenge in this country of deficits and debt.
We borrow too much, and we're not paying back our debt.
This is really about America's capability of having a strong and prosperous future.
The problem is a long-run problem. It is not just the deficits we have now. It's the ones we are facing as we look ahead. This is an American problem.
Probably should go away. In 19 cities, East Coast to West Coast, there are groups of anywhere between 50 and 500 people gathered at town meetings just like this one. Across the country, there are other 50 communities in which volunteer-led community conversations are joining us and following exactly the same agenda and conversations that we've created here today. So we're going to travel across the country by video technology to greet each city in which Americans are gathered.
We're ready to go. Colombia is in the house.
Y mira este grupo, look at this group.
Hey, from Chicago.
We need to hear your ideas and what you think we should do and what we should recommend to the President and Congress.
This is an incredible opportunity from coast to coast to come together as Americans to discuss our values and to share our beliefs about what we need to do to sustain our country's physical future.
Congress doesn't act unless they hear from folks.
Your voice matters. We're listening to you here in Washington.
We're about to go to work.
Want to look at which one of those options?
Please take out worksheet number 1.
We're going to ask you to vote. We're going to use the keypads for the first time. Just press the button of your choice. As you know, we went to a great deal of effort to get it to be a demographically representative sample of the whole country.
What we'd like to do now is ask you to pull out your keypads again.
It's just a quick poll question. We're going to give you a few minutes to share around the table what your own greatest concerns are about the current economy.
My grandmother, she's using Medicare and Medicaid, and her bills are still high. She still has high medical bills.
I want the healthcare system to have a chance to work. There are cuts that are involved in the healthcare reform, and I don't want to vote for any additional ones.
I believe that everyone should share in the opportunity to reduce the budget.
If everybody actually had a job that they could pay into it, we would be fine. We probably wouldn't even have this conversation if the unemployment rate was not so high.
That's 2 for 5%, 2 for...
The reason that you have the tax code the way it is that you're able, as a small business person, to go ahead and take those deductions and fold it right into your business and build it up and hire in people and get everything going, and it's just one thing after another, roll forward. That's why the tax code exists, to stimulate the economy.
So I think if you just go to a simplified tax situation, a simplified tax environment, then the government can better project what its revenues are going to be, and I'm going to be better able to project what I'm going to have to pay out.
We want to hear some messages from folks around the country.
We were very passionate about maintaining Medicare and Social Security, that we have paid into those programs for years, and we believe that they should stay.
It's critical that we strike a balance between taking care of our current needs and those of the future generation.
We're compromising a little bit, but realizing that's kind of where we're going to have to do the work to make the hard decisions.
We were sitting on the table with a lot of people with different political views, but we came to basically common core values. And with that understanding, we were able to tackle the problems, compromise, and come to solutions.
We need to continue this process and engage the rest of the country.
It's not I the people, it's we the people. We need to speak to you as our leaders and for you to take all of our voices.
We have a very diverse table, a lot of different opinions, but we're still respecting each other. We're probably not going to come together completely in opinion at the end of the day, but the exercise is the important thing, and that's what we're doing.
Please find the political will to use this input as if it were coming from a powerful lobbying group, because we are.
All of you have restored my confidence anyway in the ability of citizens to talk civilly about very hard issues. And I think all of us need to challenge the politicians to do as well as we have done today.
Okay, thank you. You know, I'll tell you a couple of things, the outcome of this. The things that came from citizens went directly to Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson and the Fiscal Commission. And some of you will remember that December when they released their report, the most dramatic inclusion was recommendations about cutting defense spending. The public supported that, and they had very good reasons for supporting it. The policy people, before we started, were afraid that people would cut defense spending because of waste and fraud, because that's been a theme in the country. The three issues that the public picked, the public, when you give them real information, and when you bring them together across their differences, there were hundreds of Tea Party people at these tables. There were hundreds of MoveOn.org people at these tables talking to each other. At the end of the day, they actually did accomplish reducing the federal budget deficit by $1.2 trillion by 2025. Some of you may remember that a special congressional committee headed by Paul Ryan, and I've forgotten who the Democrat was, had the same task in a slightly shorter time frame and failed to produce that compromise. We've built up a belief about ourselves in this country that we are so divided on the tough ideological issues that we can't possibly come to problem solving. For the kind of work you're doing, it's not the ideological warfare on many levels that this is, but three elements that are directly connected to how we do this, that are connected to how you do this, that on 20 years of experience doing this, I just know to be true. If you bring together a diverse mix of the public, it can't be all of us that think the same thing all the time if we want a collective decision that mobilizes people. So there's got to be some diversity in it. And then, in fact, you give people factual information, which you are stellar at. Some of that factual information, I know, is argued about in other arenas in the world you work in. That's true in every arena. But when we can talk some later in the workshop about how we get verification that these facts are accepted by key people. When those two things are true, Americans care more about solving problems than they care about ideology. That's still true of us. It may be slipping away because of the way media runs our national narrative at this point, but as long as that is true, and particularly where you're working on a community level, it is quite possible to move beyond the number of people that have currently been supporting your work to expand that by tens of thousands, I'm sure. So let me run into some of the principles that make that difference. There's 7 principles that are how we design all this work. And I'm going to spend very little time on most of them because there are 3 we're going to highlight here with you today. The first off, in our environment, if it's going to make any difference that people get together, it's got to be linked to decision makers. That's why you saw the chair of the budget committees. That's why you saw the fiscal commission chairs. I just thought when I watched that video, in terms of the kind of community forums that you might develop out of what we're talking here today, inviting the elected officials from the community may be the fastest way to get them to endorse your deadline strategy. So think that way about what are decision makers that should be part of the process. They're not big showtime. They're not running the thing. They're just another participant like everyone else. Okay, demographic diversity. We're going to spend a lot of, well, excuse me, I want to quickly. So the outreach strategy. We will spend a lot of time on that in the workshop this afternoon. So I'll just barely go over it. Have to have actual, factual, informed participation. It has to be facilitated. And then this is just human dynamics. You put a table of 10 people together, some of us are extroverts and some of us are introverts. And if you don't structure it and if you don't have a facilitator, you know what happens. The extroverts talk, they set the agenda, and the people who might have had great ideas don't ever even speak up. So it has to be facilitated. And one of the richest assets this country has. Every community in this country has people who've been trained in what would technically be called good process facilitation. Many people in education, in religion, there's a whole profession in management consulting called organization development. And in our experience, AmericaSpeaks, 5,000 people in New York, the table facilitators were professionals who make their living that way, who wanted to volunteer to do this to support the community. You've got those people in your community. You want them to discover shared priorities. In your case, you may end up discovering actions that the community wants to take. And then, this is another mistake that's made constantly in bringing the public together in the United States. It's all oriented toward the first event. And if you do this well, people are going to feel enthusiastic, they are going to feel empowered, and they want to know what to do next. So as a principle in terms of as you're organizing these kinds of community forums, you definitely want to plan for step 2, step 3, step 4. Okay. Our whole workshop is going to be about a big chunk of it about outreach, but I'll just say, we had essentially 5 different kinds of strategies: how to use mass media, how to use retail media, how to use the organizations that already support your work, how to use traditional grassroots organizers. We did budget summits in Washington, D.C. for every 2 years for the 8 years that Mayor Williams was mayor. And when we first started, very broken city. Any of you who know anything about D.C., they didn't even control their own finances. There was a finance control board. We had a hard time really getting people from across the river, which is much lower income, much higher percentage of African American people, to believe that it would make a difference. We did what people say to do traditionally. Go to the African American churches. They'll be able to get the outreach. Well, the trust and confidence in the government was so broken that that didn't even work. So what we did was went a layer beneath that. We sat in those churches and we asked literally neighborhood by neighborhood, who in this neighborhood is the person who is most trusted? Every one of you who have any experience of being a marginalized community, think in your own life. When somebody invites you to do something different than you've usually done, you think about it, but your habits, you're not likely to do it. What's the tipping point? Someone you trust says, come to this meeting. Your voice matters. Or come to this meeting. It might make a difference in education. So who we found was grandmothers were the most trusted voices in most of those neighborhoods and became part of our outreach strategy. Okay. I'm not going to go more into that because the AmericaSpeaks team that's here is going to spend a lot of time with you. In this case, it was multi-site, and we needed to make sure that all the sites were simultaneously receiving the same information. Annette and I had fun talking just briefly that even the way we use technology, forget for the moment multiple sites, but you might pick a city. I'll just randomly pick one. Philadelphia has done some kind of this part of this work. Mayor Nutter really did understand it. I don't know about the current mayor. Chief Ramsey used to be the police chief in Washington, D.C. So there's a lot of city leadership that understands this level of kind of organizing. We use technology so that people could vote and that their ideas could be tracked at the same time. The theme team is how we pulled together the ideas from 350 tables all across the country. But when you're doing this in your community for 100 people, or we're even going to push you maybe 200 or more, we're going to suggest that it's organized in round tables so that the power is with the tables. You could do the same process with paper and pencil. It just takes a little more time. Somebody takes notes at the table. They run together, and somebody has to have time to read them. But again, you could ask the hows of that this afternoon. The information. You're way ahead of many organizations. You've got the information. I'm going to draw a distinction here, though, of often what happens in advocacy organizations making this transition to a different kind of a community forum. I'll use my personal example. My highest personal activism, where I go out in the community, I knock on people's doors, I do that shtick, is in the environment. The environmentalist movement has been very evidence-based and uses a lot of experts and has typically had a core group in communities, or lots of different ones, that at time will make the same challenge to themselves that you've made to yourselves. And I wouldn't want this broadcast widely, but some of you may have run into this yourself. The environmental movement has not ever been able to really bridge the gap about how do they do real outreach to just ordinary people who aren't already advocates and who don't have a great deal of expertise. I just sat through the panel here before. It was fantastic. If I were a little different kind of person than I am, it also could have been very intimidating. A lot of words were used that I didn't understand. There's a whole track of research in every piece of them. That's not how I think. But that is what happens to many people when you push at them a lot of scientifically researched background data as the only avenue into information. So we're suggesting when you do these community forums, yes, you're going to want that, but there's a different kind of information guide that you're going to produce. It's going to talk about what's happened to women in breast cancer over these years. It's going to put out that data about still too many people are dying and our rates are actually going down in terms of metastasis. So, but you get the difference? If you only ever put out that very evidence-based scientific information in the way an educator would, or the way a scientist would, or the way you would do a briefing on the Hill, you're going to lose a whole lot of the people. Now, as a second step, and believe me, there's not much thicker, convoluted information than the federal budget. You see up on this screen 2 information guides that we wrote. They're still up on our website if you wanted to look at them. That meant 3,500 people worked 7 hours on the federal budget and never spent 2 minutes feeling like it was intimidating. Okay? So the principle, not just your evidence-based data, but think through, these are newcomers. These are people who haven't been engaged before. What do they need, what do they need as their link in to our information? Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Facilitated discussions. Oops, I went the wrong way. Well, I'm going to talk for a minute about the facilitated discussions. I'll just back up to that list of principles, sorry. Here's the other most difficult transition for somebody who's dedicated to advocacy, to designing and running effectively the kind of open community forum that we're talking about. And we were on a conference call with some of your own ground folks or field leaders. And we quickly got into this conversation. When I'm advocating, when I've moved into that passionate place, I want you to vote for so-and-so for mayor. My whole physiological system, my whole speech pattern, I'm broadcasting. You with me? Okay? If you're sitting on the other side of that broadcast and you already know you want to vote for the other candidate, if you know that, you just stop listening. Okay? You don't know for sure, but at some point, just the energy that I'm pushing at you to do what I want you to do, what's it do? You can all think it creates resistance. And once that resistance has been created, people do not hear as well. People do not come up with as open-ended creative options. You following me? Now, you're in a situation that I would call a paradox. 2 things are true at the same time. You only want to do these community forums because you want more people to join your movement. That is perfectly legitimate. That's a good reason to be doing it. The other flip side of the coin is you will get more people to join your movement if you put out the information and you design the process in a way that it is open-ended and each person in the room discovers for themselves that they agree with your direction. And not all of them are going to. That's a given. But having done this for 20 years, and I'll back up and give you some data about the oboe thing again. In my experience, done this way and done well, somewhere between 75 and 80% of people who joined you choose to become part of your advocacy project. But it takes great discipline to hold back from what you've been perfect at for 22 years. Just hold that, design something open-ended, and then join those that join you back in the advocacy at the other end. That's the kind of community forum that Annette asked us to come here and talk about. And we can do more in my Q&A, and we can do more this afternoon about that paradox. This project, MacArthur Foundation gave Berkeley, a research team from Berkeley and Harvard, the largest grant, it's the largest social science research blind survey research project that's ever been done in the United States. 3,500 people, these demographics, were matched by another 3,500 people in the blind study. 97% of these people participated, which those of you who do any kind of survey research know is just off the charts. They did a pre and a post test. Percentages were a little lower here, but more than enough for statistical comparison. What I'm about to say to you won't surprise you at all. In the morning in the pre-test, 88% of the self-identified conservatives said, I won't raise taxes under any circumstances. That's the mantra of that ideology. If I walk over here, those self-identified liberals, what was the mantra? I won't cut entitlements. I won't Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. It takes a bright fourth grader about 15 minutes looking at this data to know that if we're ever going to get out of this problem, you have to do both. End of the day, in the post with these people, just almost exactly the same percentage of conservatives did raise taxes to solve the problem, and about a 2% higher group of the liberals did cut entitlements. They were in a safe environment, diverse opinions, real facts, and they moved to solve the problem rather than shouting each other's mantras to each other. Now, you're not going to have that kind of drama in these meetings, but you need to know when you go in, what are the kinds of things that are likely to be in people's heads that butt up against the evidence-based research? You know, the only one that I know about you as a member of the public is your stand on mammograms. I, like every other woman in this country, bought the cookie, or I don't know if I should say it that way, but actually believe that part of my self-responsible behavior to not end up with breast cancer. Anyway, I don't need to go through the litany, but that's an example. So think through, what are things that might be buttons for people in the kind of data that you're going to present them? You might even want to do a focus group with some women in your community that have never been involved in it as you're thinking through the information that you need to share. Okay, let's see. I think I've probably said enough about each of those. And I want to be sure there's plenty of time for another. You know, in your case, you're probably going to do hour, 2-hour meetings. The folks that we went through this with sat together for 7 hours. There is one thing that I'd like to put out when you get into the discussion period. Many times when people bring a community forum together, they try to go right to the heart of the matter. How much money should we be spending on breast cancer research, and what kind of research should it be, or whatever that would be. Always best in this kind of community forum to first ask, when they just start to discuss, either a values question or a vision question. My guess is when you made your transition to Breast Cancer Deadline 2020, you asked yourselves a whole lot of vision questions. We've come this far, what do we see over there? And it's part of what led you to a shift in strategy. Long ago, we did this process in Social Security at a time when the big mantra was, let's privatize Social Security. If we had started out the discussion on what are your beliefs about privatizing Social Security, we would have immediately divided the table down the middle. People would have already been into a position about Social Security. The question we asked was, what values would you like to see members of Congress hold sacred as they look at reforming Social Security? Okay? Now this afternoon you're going to have a chance to practice designing some of those questions yourselves that are deeply in your experience space. But have I made the point well enough and clear enough? Okay. So we've said enough about that. You saw that in the video. Well, this just as an American, I'll back up. How satisfied are we with the tone and quality of political discussion? Satisfied in our country today? And this was in 2010, before the Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. 4%. How satisfied today? 91%. So, you know, we have a lot to do to create public events that meet our needs. Okay, I want to get to 3 pictures I'm going to show you, because I'm sure when you put out the challenge to do something different in your communities, and I think community roundtable was the first term that you used, lots of different images of what the public meeting might look like came to mind. So I've just chosen 3. This is one we see all the time in politics, but we also see it all the time on advocacy issues, where there is a person who is running it, who it's their meeting, then there's a few questions, you know, you can ask a question here and there, but almost all of the airtime is taken up by the person or couple of persons who have the microphone. The rest of us predominantly are audience with Q&A. Those things have their place, but I don't think that's what you're after in this new approach to mobilizing more people. Another one we see very often that's done very well, and I was part of watching it be done very well. And you may, in your communities, want to replicate panel discussions for the right kinds of stakeholders. It is a great forum for transmitting information and getting people's questions answered. But for why you invited us here, and for another level, that's not how the room looks. Our team this afternoon will talk more about this, and again, this is a much larger room. But we're going to say to you, in terms of this kind of community forum that's really open to get more diverse people in your community in the room, to get them engaged and have them feel ownership of it, you want to change the power dynamics in the room completely. There's no upfront stage. The room is organized in small tables of 10. You've all been in that context before. You know if it's done well and you have information, the power goes to the table. That's where the real dialogue happens. That's where the real change happens. And that, I think, is one option of the kind of community forum that we are here dealing with you. So, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I have to say I've learned a lot about the core differences in how you use people, how you use money, how you organize, if advocacy is your purpose, or if community engagement is your purpose. In the last 10 years, a lot of us at AmericaSpeaks began to understand, if you go back decades, advocacy was the primary model that did the big social change in our nation. Start with civil rights, move right on to the women's movement, the anti-war movement, the environmentalist movement. And it really was all about how we usually think of grassroots mobilization. I don't think anybody's written the definitive or done the definitive research about this yet, but so far, we don't seem to be able to mobilize movements like that since the late 80s. Now, information technology, in particular social media, is in the moment extraordinary at mobilizing people to do something right then. But they also have not been able to make the transition from mobilizing in the moment to a sustained movement. And I think where we are, now this is me personally speaking, in what you're trying, the social change you are trying to bring about, which has a huge resource issue in it, which has a huge political policy issue in it, or policy framework issue in it. It has to be a movement, and it has to be a movement, and you have actually begun a movement, but to date the movement isn't a large enough number of people to make that shift in public will linking with political will. So here's what we've been doing for a while, is working with advocacy groups, and most are more resistant than you are. You invited us. We were thrilled to be invited. Most advocacy groups have a very difficult time understanding that deliberative community engagement is a tool that they can use at the right moments in their advocacy campaign. Are you with me? So they're not reliant on AmericaSpeaks coming in and doing it separate from them. If they got the tools, if they got the skills, they could do it themselves. It's a function of design, and it's a function of having the capacity individually and organizationally, that paradox I talked about, to honestly, to authentically suspend for a period of time your press to get other people to believe what you believe. During that suspended time, your whole purpose is to design the process, provide the information, let them talk, so they discover themselves that they actually believe your position. Then you move back to advocacy with 70 out of 100 people that weren't with you before. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I tried to do here was just point out a few bullet points about what we've learned about what makes it difficult for people who are real advocates to allow this open space in a serious enough way that it can make a difference. You have to broaden the frame of the issue, which can bring more people and diverse organizations into the conversation. It might, and I don't know enough about what you do and what your touch points are of what that would look like, but you do. And that this afternoon, there's an AmericaSpeaks facilitator with each of your teams and one of your field advocates. And we thought that combination of expertise, you can play around with how would I frame this in my community, etc. Good public dialogue builds trust and relationships, increasing the possibility of people transcending differences to work for the common good. You know that, and you've seen it and you've experienced yourselves. So even at that moment in the first round, if you don't get 100% of them to advocate to your issue, you have a relationship with them at this point. Something has happened in a way that you can continue a conversation over an extended period of time, even if you stay in a different position. Our discovery is that this brings a lot of new leaders into an advocacy group. You know, again, it's very, how do I describe it? Any social system, this isn't just advocacy groups, any social system begins to rely on a certain set of people to be their leaders. And those people just keep playing that role. Some of you are probably in that position in your community. And there may be other people who actually see you do that. They're grateful that you do it. They make the assumption that we don't need more leaders. This kind of open-ended process will pop out some people that are a complete surprise, that have not been in your issue before, but it touches them personally in a way that they're going to be ready to really go through the steps to become a leader. I've said this one already, so it's a repeat, but then this is the part that's so hard for many, many advocates to really let go and let happen. I'm not going to convince you to come on my path. I'm going to create a space for you to discover and learn that it's already your path too. And when you do this over time in a community, it really does build momentum and create political cover if the results are then back aligned with advocacy. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.